I'm Will Alexander. I'm here with Carl Zimmer. He's one of the premier science writers in the country. He's written books on evolution, the history of the brain, parasites, and other subjects. He's written for Slate, New York Times, and frequently speaks about science in the media. And you helped moderate a session yesterday called Death to Obfuscation?
Obfuscation.
Obfuscation. Can you tell me about that and how it went?
What I was doing with my fellow moderator, a blogger named Ed Young, is trying to give the people at our workshop a sense of what works for making writing about science interesting, how to be clear, how to be compelling, and to just remind people of things that they might not be aware of, mistakes that they might be making. Often, scientists tend to talk in jargon, for example.
Can you tell me about? It was a very packed session. Can you tell me about? Was there anything that you wanted to talk about but didn't get a chance to?
Actually, I felt pretty happy because really, if there aren't that many things to tell people about how to write well. I mean, I sort of felt that in about 15 or 20 minutes we were done, and then we just sort of kept reiterating what we were saying before, or answering questions from people who had different angles on the issues we were raising. Things like making a story gripping right from the start, and that's easy to say. It's very hard to do. So, I mean, I can tell you some of the basics of how to write about science well in 15 or 20 minutes, but then going off and actually writing an article well can take days, weeks, months.
Absolutely, yeah. One of the things I think that's interesting about you is that you're just in kind of an unusual position, that sometimes you're an expert, but in some ways you're the journalist asking people for questions, and then sometimes you're appearing on TV, to answer questions about, can we put the brain into a computer. What of these roles do you like the most, and how do you navigate between those roles?
Well, it's very flattering to be considered after a while an expert in some of the areas I'm interested in, and it's tricky though because the kind of role of the journalist is often the sort of curious outsider who's trying to learn about a situation, and when you start acting like the expert, you have to sort of pass judgment almost on what's important, what's not important. So, writing a textbook, for example, which is something I've done recently, was a very new kind of challenge for me. What I don't like is when I write an article, especially about medical stories. Every now and then I write about medicine, and I always get flooded with letters from people who suffer from the condition I'm writing about. I mean, I wrote about people who suffer from musical hallucinations. So they might actually hear a marching band in the room next door. And I spoke to a few people who suffer from this condition, and I talked to neuroscientists who are trying to figure it out. It's real. Scientists don't really understand why it happens, and they certainly have very little treatment to offer, and that's the story. Well, I would get so many messages, emails, letters from people just begging for some kind of help, having read it and saying, oh my gosh, I'm not the only person who thinks there's a marching band in the room next door, or opera, or whatever. And tell me what I can do. And I just, first of all, I email back and say, well, I'm not a doctor, and there's not much that we can do, so.
I guess one article that I read recently by you was a response to the NASA article about the supposed bacteria that were using arsenic as a building block of life. And you wrote an article in Slate that was kind of skeptical of that. Can you tell me about what you wrote and what's happened in that month since then?
So some researchers claimed that they had found bacteria in a California lake that could use arsenic to build their DNA, something that had never been seen before in any living thing on Earth, and it could have implications for how life might exist on other planets, kind of an alternative life form. It got a huge amount of press, even before the paper was published and before the press conference. Rumors were swirling, NASA's found aliens. The paper came out, and there were a number of sort of straightforward articles. I wrote a blog post just sort of like laying out the basics of the paper. But I got a sense pretty quickly after the paper came out that a lot of scientists were not happy with their claims and the hullabaloo around it. And over the week, so the paper comes out on a Thursday, and then over the weekend, I'm getting in touch with people, and my editor at SITT says, why don't you write a piece on this? Because I get the feeling, like you do, that there's something going on. So I got in touch with about a dozen experts, people I know who can comment with good authority on this, and they were generally really strongly negative. I mean, someone even went so far to say, on the record, this paper should not have been published. And I think it was a bit of a shock it was a bit of a shock to NASA to see that, and I think it was a bit of a shock to some people they felt like, oh, well, we were told one thing and now we're being told another. I think it's just sort of basic journalism, and that's what we journalists, it's the kind of thing we journalists need to just bear in mind that we should be doing. We're not stenographers, so since then, I mean, a lot of bloggers have been writing about these issues, and even sort of the large newspapers are coming around and saying, oh, well, maybe there's some doubts. So we're still kind of waiting for the next stage. I mean, really what's got to happen is that these scientists have to supply these bacteria to other scientists who are going to try to replicate the results or do other experiments to really see if their claims hold up. That'll happen, but it's going to take a while. I mean, blogging is fast, but science is slow.
Your latest book is called Brain Cuttings. It just came out. Can you tell me about the book?
Sure. So Brain Cuttings is kind of an experiment for me. It's an ebook, and it's only an ebook. It's really fascinating to me that we're at the point now where not only can you self-publish on a blog, but you can even just put together a book and in a short period of time have it for sale on Kindle. So what I thought I would do is I would take some of my favorite stories about the brain that I've been writing over the past couple of years for Discover and elsewhere, and combine them into a book of essays. And so I worked with a publisher, a small publisher called Scott and Nix, and together we created this thing, and it's been a lot of fun, although it's a little odd because, you know, when someone buys it, I can't autograph it for them. So we're still dealing with the kind of the awkwardness of, you know, a book just sort of evaporating into digital information. But still, it's been a fun experiment.
Great, good. And going back to one of your earlier books, I know that you another book, Parasite Rex, you ended up having a tapeworm named after you. Can you tell me a bit about that, and have you had any other parasites named after you?
No, just the one. So Parasite Rex was, I wrote it kind of a sort of a love song to parasites, just basically saying that parasites rule the world, they're the most successful life forms on Earth. They have this bad reputation as being degenerate and simple and boring and unimportant, and all that's false. There, among the people who read it after it came out was a undergraduate named Carrie Filer, who was trying to figure out what she was going to do after she graduated, and I think she had been trying to talk herself into becoming a parasitologist, someone who studies parasites, but I think for her she thought, well, that's weird. And then she read this book and she said, okay, I don't care if people think it's weird, I'm going to do this. So it's really fun to actually like write a book that steers someone in a new direction in their life. So she's gotten her PhD in parasitology, and part of what she was doing was describing tapeworms, actually little teeny tapeworms that live inside stingrays off the coast of Australia. There are thousands of species of tapeworms that have yet to be described, and so it's up to people like Carrie to describe them. And so she was coming up with names, and she decided, okay, this one's going to be Acanthobothrium zimmeri, which is quite nice. But on the other hand, people there's so many tapeworms, people name them after their friends or their grandparents or their neighbors. There are a lot of names to go around, so it's not quite as special as it might sound.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for agreeing to the interview.
Oh, thanks.